Hey, Jonathan, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So I'm really excited to have you because you have, first of all, recorded well over 500 podcast episodes. You're definitely a veteran in this world. So that's always exciting because it means the interview is usually going to be really good. And you like to focus on and talk about a subject that I think is very interesting for a lot of businesses, and that is hourly billing.
Yes.
And whether people should or should not, you have some very strong opinions on that, so I'm excited to hear that. But before we jump into kind of the meat of that, I'd love to hear you tell a little bit about your own entrepreneurial journey. How'd you get to where you are now, and kind of what does that look like from your life in your own words?
Sure. So I'll try and do quick. I was working as a database administrator at my one and only corporate job at Staples in 2002. For a few years leading up to 2002, became dissatisfied with that position and decided to take my skill set and get a job with an agency or a firm. So I looked around at some of the big firms at the time. I got hired at a place that had an office in Atlanta, moved from the Boston area to the Atlanta area, and got my first taste of what I would call consulting. It was development and consulting with using a platform called FileMaker. And I learned a ton there. I worked directly with the owner. When I first joined, there were, I think 30 or 40 developers there. So it was like a dev shop, and just learned a ton there. Over time, the business split, and I stayed with the owner. One of the other partners went off and started their own, sort of split off the clients and stuff. And I ended up being the VP after that split. And it was my responsibility to manage the developers, to write proposals for new prospects and clients. And my entire life began to revolve around hours. I had been doing development, loved it, but now that I was in this more of a management role, my whole life was just hours. And focusing on that, it occurred to me one day that our best developer was losing us money, or maybe we were breaking even on him because his salary was high. We billed him out at a particular rate, and he would just finish things really quickly. And it was like we were barely breaking even on his salary, where we had a junior person who was very slow. We billed him out at the same rate. He kept his clients very happy because he had a really good bedside manner. And we were basically printing money with this junior person. And I couldn't reconcile this in my mind. And I thought about it for weeks before it even occurred to me to question that maybe hourly billing might have something to do with this. Once I realized that, I started to see it everywhere. I started to see it as a problem creeping into the business everywhere, causing all sorts of problems, billing in arrears, and essentially loaning money to your clients instead of getting paid in advance, and so on and so forth. There's a million problems with it. Administrative overhead, arguing about hours. Should we charge people to argue about hours? And it was ridiculous. So I found another approach. Now that I was looking at it, I found an approach called value-based fees. And I decided I wanted to do that. And so I went solo and started that in 2006. And it was just amazing immediately, and been going ever since.
That's awesome. So you have a strong track record of having some of that, corporate experience in the background, but then now transitioning into your own thing, and then helping others understand the things that you learned over time, and then be able to apply those in a quicker manner than maybe it would have taken you or I over years and years and years of learning it the hard way. You're now kind of out teaching people. So is that kind of what your primary role is now? Educating, coaching, and training others around, the idea of value-based pricing?
Yeah, when I first went solo, I was relatively well known in a small space, and all of my colleagues were kind of asking me how it was going because they couldn't believe I left. I had a great job. Why would you do that? And I said, well, because I'm going to stop billing by the hour. And everybody's heads exploded. And like, how are you going to do that? And they would check in with me, how's it going? And I would report great results. And so then they would ask me, like, could you come and speak to our meetup, or could you tell us more about that, or could you coach me one-on-one? But it was always a side thing for me. for many years. But I was blogging about it a little bit. I did a few talks about it. And then in 2016, for whatever reason, I decided it was time to collect all of this into a book, which I called Hourly Billing is Nuts. And everything really pivoted from that point into me going full-time, teaching people, all the practical experience I had gained over the past 10 years of value pricing and helping them apply it to their business. Because the more I looked at it, the more insidious it became. And it really started to bother me that people were in this feast, famine, hamster wheel. It's the hourly trap. Hourly is what does that to you. And I think it's bad for projects. It's bad for the clients. It's bad for everyone. And yet it's the de facto way that people bill for their services. It's like how almost all service providers, air quotes, price their work. They're not pricing their work at all. They're billing for their time. And it causes but people don't even question it. And it causes all these problems that kind of drives me nuts.
Well, I'm super interested in talking about this because selfishly, it applies a lot to me and what I do because I run a digital agency. So we do a little bit of everything from development to website builds to marketing. And I know a lot of other folks who do that as well. I've had quite a few on the show who are other agency owners. But really, hourly billing applies to a whole lot of stuff. It's not just the agency world that I'm in. It's a lot of companies just bill for time. So what's kind of is there a particular niche or area that you kind of tend to lean towards, or is it just kind of anybody who's billing by the hour?
Well, my background's in software development, so most of my anecdotes and metaphors are from that space. So I tend to attract a lot of independent software developers and owners of firms, that sort of thing. But over the years, I've been running this daily mailing list for I think I've mailed 912 emails in a row now. And I've started to attract people to that list from adjacent professions that also bill by the hour. So people like copywriters and designers and a smattering of photographers, some illustrators, the occasional lawyer, an accountant. But yeah, so it's mostly, my experience is really strong in the software development space. So those are the people it's most easy for me to turn the light bulb on for, because I can read their minds. Basically, I can say, oh yeah, and let me guess, you have scope creep and it goes like this, and they're like, yes. So those are my core people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a hot topic. I was saying in the pre-show there before we started the episode, I just came back from an event where literally there seems to be an annual debate between those who believe in value-based pricing and those who believe in hourly billing, and just really interesting to hear all the thoughts behind it, because I think the thing about hourly billing is that on the surface, it's really easy, because it's very easy to just go, okay, there's so many hours in the day and you can only work so many of those hours and there's so many people and here's what we can bill per hour and justify. And then we can assign that to our costs. And it seems on the surface to be easier, I think, for some people than maybe value-based pricing is. So for those who are listening and maybe have never even heard this term before, we think there's a lot of people who don't even know when we say value-based pricing. I think maybe there's a little bit of curse of knowledge for you and I. And I know what that is. I've seen it explained, but maybe somebody that's listening doesn't even know what we're talking about. So back us up to the very beginning here. And if you're explaining value-based pricing to somebody for the first time who all they know is hourly billing,
yep,
what's kind of some of the fundamentals that you might teach them or talk through as it relates to value-based pricing?
Okay. Before I do that, I just want to make one quick comment, which is that value-based pricing is just one way to ditch hourly billing. There are other ways that I would usually recommend for people who are going straight from only understanding hourly. There's some easier steps you can take. But to answer your question, value-based fees or value pricing flips the notion of pricing on its head. So instead of basing a price on your hours times how many hours you think it's going to take. So tell me if this is the same in your world. But in the software world, what happens is someone contacts you somehow, word of mouth. Maybe they come to your website. They understand that you're good at, let's say, building WordPress websites, and they say, "Yeah, we've got this WordPress website. We want you to do these things. What's your hourly rate?" Like, that's a very normal thing to do. It's the way that it's the way that clients have been trained to expect to be charged. And when you're going from, say, an in-house position or maybe from college and you start out solo, you think, oh, well, what hourly rate should I charge? So everybody, it's easy in the sense that everybody, it's the regular way. It's the normal way. It's what people all expect. So it's easy in that sense. It's also easy in the sense that as the seller, so the WordPress developer in this case, you're taking zero risk, because if you're wrong about your estimate, you just keep getting paid. So you're not really taking any risk. You're putting all of the risk on the client. You're basing your estimate on a time and materials quote, essentially. Now, to flip it around, and this is going to terrify everyone. So if you're listening to this and you think this is terrifying, just bear with me for a second. Instead of figuring out how long you think it's going to take you to do something and then giving an estimate and then maybe or maybe not hitting that estimate, and statistically you're probably not going to hit it because most of them go over. Instead of that, you talk to the client and you say, well, yes, I see that you want me to do these things, but why do you want them done? Why do you want to do this now? Why is this urgent? Why would you hire someone like me to do it? Why not just do it yourself or hire someone internally to do it? And you find all of these reasons that essentially you interview them to make sure that there's a good fit between their desired business outcome and what you can provide for them, not the tasks that they want you to do, but the desired business outcome of this endeavor. And you get a sense of what that would be worth to a business like this in a situation like they are in. And in some cases, that value is going to be pretty low. Maybe you're talking to a mom and pop pizza place and they want you to completely build an online ordering system for them from scratch. And that would probably take you, 6 months of 7 days a week. And you'd have to charge, $80,000 for that or whatever it is. And the value is just not there for them because they're already making as many pizzas as they can. They just want to add this convenience there. Probably maximum home run outcome for them would be sell 20% more pizzas, and then they'd have to open a bigger store or something like that. So there's just not enough value there for someone to say yes to an $80,000 quote. They're going to say they're basically going to say no, that doesn't work. So sometimes when you talk to someone in a value model and you determine what the home run would be, home run outcome from this project, and you price that, it might not be a high enough value for you to even engage with them. Now, in those cases, people who are used to billing by the hour, they look at value pricing, they say it's impossible. I'll never be able to. I'll get killed on scope creep. No one will ever accept my proposals because my proposals will be too expensive. The way that you grow your business when you're operating in a value-based model is you work with bigger and bigger and bigger clients. You don't have to hire more people. In fact, you can go down to a business of one and charge based on the value of the outcome that you'd be delivering. And the bigger the company is, the bigger value they're going to get because it has a downstream effect across multiple employees, multiple departments, multiple locations. So if Domino's comes to you and says, oh, we need you to build us an online ordering system from scratch, and you say, in your mind, you're like, this will probably take me 6 months to a year. But that's not what you base your price on. You base your price on the fact that Domino's, if they can move the needle by 10% with this new ordering system, it's going to be worth $5 million per year to them, at least $5 million per year to them. So if you come up with a price that's less than $5 million and you say, oh, well, we can do this for $500,000 and it'll take us no less than 6 months, but it could take us up to a year. And you can pay us $500,000 to do that, and we'll guarantee these particular outcomes. And those outcomes might be leading indicators or lagging indicators. We can get into what you might guarantee or how you would build trust to make them believe that you could deliver these results. But the concept is you figure out what the desired business outcome is, what it might be worth to them, which is, it's an estimate. You're estimating what it might be worth to a business like this in this situation. And then what I usually do is give myself three prices that are less than that value. And then, and only then, do I start thinking about what I might do at those three different prices. So to summarize, instead of thinking how much work, what's it going to cost me to execute this? What do I have to charge for this to make sense for me to take it on? Completely flip that and think, what is this worth to the client? And then pick some prices that are less than what it's probably worth to them. And then I start thinking about scope after I've already come up with prices. So it flips the whole concept completely on its head.
Yeah, and it really changes the introductory conversation with the customer as well, because it's all about like why, like you kind of went through the kind of the 5 whys idea of like, why do you need this? And what about why this and why this and why this? Like that whole thing has a lot of value in asking questions. And back in the day when somebody would come to us, they would say, hey, we need to build a website. And I would say, great, what do you want to put on it? And they'd say this, this, and this. And we're like, okay, that'll be like, I don't know, $1,000, you know, and whatever it was. And that was it. And we just built what they told us to build. The problem is, and this is true not just for our industry, but in a lot of industries, people ask for things that aren't really what they actually need, want, or desire. And those questions that you asked up front, not only could potentially, what we're talking about here is make you more money by having a higher price or a different price model than hourly, whether it's a fixed price or project-based or value-based or whatever it is. That also can end up with the customer getting a better product, because now when somebody comes to us and says, why do you, or build us a website, the first question we ask is, well, why do you want a website?
100%.
Because there's different answers to that. They might just say, well, we want to build credibility so that when people refer us and somebody goes and looks at it online, they know that we're legit. I mean, that's one reason. Or they might need, better search traffic and they want to actually generate leads. That's a whole different thing, and then we always go into the question of, well, what is the value of a customer to you? Like how, because ultimately we've got to know how much time and investment and energy we can put into it. Because like you said, if you think about 3 different price levels that you could offer, there's almost always something more or less that you could offer somebody based on your skill sets and services that you offer. And sometimes if we're just focused on what they ask the first time they show up, we may be just missing the picture and ultimately not even providing them what they need.
Yeah, it happens all the time. In fact, this is why, who hasn't had this experience? If you've been freelancing for a while, you've almost surely had the experience of getting a lead, them asking for your hourly rate, you give them an hourly rate, they make a decision about whether it seems reasonable compared to the other people they've been talking to, which is completely irrational because it doesn't tell them how much money they're going to end up spending. That's the thing that really matters. And then you get into this, like you described, they say, okay, we want you to do these 10 things. They give you a punch list of things they want to do. And the person says, great, I'll get started, And the thing, one of the insidious things about hourly billing is that since there is no risk for the seller, then there's no encouragement, that doesn't encourage them to find out what the goal is. Because there's no, so what ends up happening is this. So you get to work, you start doing these things. You've never asked what the point is. Like, why are we even doing this? You're just like, oh, I'm good at this. They've got money for it. I want the money. So I'm going to do it.
Right.
And then you get to the end of the project, or what you think is the end of the project. And they're like, well, this is no good. We need you to do this. We still need you to do that. And they start giving you things that weren't on the original punch list, because in their mind, there is a goal that they're trying to achieve. There is. That's why they're talking to people. And if you don't find out what it is in advance, you're just like wandering around in the dark, you're just basically pouring best practices on these to-dos, these tasks, and you're kind of driving in the dark. You're driving with like a blacked out windshield. And so when you get to the end of the estimate, because you probably didn't give them a price, you probably gave them an estimate. You get to the end of the estimate, you've done everything that they asked you to do. They might not be mad at you. They might not blame you, but they're not happy because they've spent the budget, or they've spent how much they were planning to spend, and they haven't achieved some goal that they never shared with you because you never asked. So now it turns out you're only halfway through the project and they've got a really painful decision to make. Do we keep going with this person or just kill the project, or, perhaps go with someone else? And that situation is very uncomfortable because you're not dealing, it's emotionally stressful. They are perhaps in a financial bind. There's all kinds of problems with this. And that is just one way that an hourly sort of project can blow up in your face. And this one solution is to give people a fixed price per project. And my recommendation is to base that price on the value of the project and not on time and materials or, cost plus or something like that. If you do that, you probably are going to get killed. You're probably going to feel like you're losing money because you never had the correct conversation in the first place. Like, how can you satisfy a customer if you don't find out up front what's going to satisfy them? Just
Right.
magic? Like coincidence? It's ridiculous.
So one thing I think that's really important to clarify on what you just said for anybody that's listening and new to these kind of discussions and thought processes is, even though what you're not suggesting is that you take the whatever your actual cost per hour is, especially if you have a team and you got multiple people involved, you know what your cost per hour is or should on those people. What you're not suggesting is just having a multiple of that and billing that necessarily, but you still need to know what that cost is, obviously, especially if you're working off of a team of people versus just your own time.
Well, there's a gray area there, which is that it depends on how big your margins are. So if you're working with a really big client, if you're working with Domino's and you're going to charge them $1.5 million for a mobile app, and you've got a designer and 2 developers back end and front end that you're positive can bang it out in 3 months. And even if you're completely wrong and it takes them a year, you still know that there's no way that you're not going to make a profit off of it. I mean, like, it would have to, so like when people bring up what you just brought up, it's a very common question. It's a common thing to point out because people are used to operating with razor thin margins, which is why they can't get ahead, because you're working so hard for smaller and smaller returns. So this completely flips it around. And if you imagine, if dear listener, if you've ever done a fixed price project before and felt like it went very poorly, think back to it. Just imagine for a second how it would have gone if the price you gave was 10 times higher than the price you did give. You wouldn't be caring about like your employees' salaries or hourly rate or anything like that.
Right.
Now you might be saying to me, yes, but they never would have accepted the proposal at 10x, but that's a different problem. There probably is a client out there that would have. So it's really a question of finding clients that have a big enough, I call it expensive problem, an expensive enough problem that you can address, that you can set your price so high that, like getting worried about tracking your profitability on a given project against like a particular employee's salary is comical. It's just a waste of time.
Yeah, that's a totally different perspective than, certainly how I used to operate. I mean, back in the day, especially when it was just me and I was building simple websites, and then even once I started having contractors and team members, I think that there was a part of me that felt like, this is just full transparency of my past experience with these things. There was part of me that felt like every project I was gambling a little bit, and I was like rolling the dice that I might make money or might not. And I think that's really good insight that you just had. And I think that big part of the problem was I just wasn't billing enough. I mean, the opportunity wasn't big enough to some extent. And so I was creating too much risk for myself. Because you can do the opposite of what you were talking about earlier, which is you could go pure hourly and you're putting all the risk on the client to some extent, but you also could go fixed price yourself way too low, and then you're putting all the risk on yourself. And that's when you really start to stress out about scope creep, because when your price is too low, you like you said, you got a razor thin margin, you can afford zero scope creep. Where if the budget's, gigantic, you can do whatever you want.
Right. And everybody knows that things are going to change. Like, you can't discover everything about the project at the beginning. It'd be impossible. So value pricing cuts both ways, which is what you're talking about. So if you go to this, Joe's Pizza, and they say, we would need you to build this like online ordering application, and you say, oh, well, that'll be $1 million. They're going to say, well, that's ridiculous. We can't afford that. See you later. Bye. But if you talk to them and you say, well, why do you need that? Are you at capacity? Like, how much extra pizza making capacity do you actually have? And they say, well, about 20%. Like, well, is this really the only way so what you're trying to do is like what, maximize that percentage? Or are you trying to box out a competitor? Like, what are you trying to do here? Which is not the kind of conversation like a web developer or mobile developer is used to having. They're used to, in that initial meeting, talking about things like the database model, like how many screens, I don't know, how much traffic volume do you expect? They ask all these scope questions, and they don't find out what the success criteria is. What is the home run? What are we trying to achieve here? You might not even need an online ordering system. I might be able to come up with some way where I plug Zapier into WordPress or like some form plugin into WordPress, and off to the races. We're all done here. and charge you $5,000 for it, and it takes you 2 days. So if you find out what the goal is, the home run, the business outcome, and then you can determine roughly, it's not an exact science, but you can determine roughly what this is going to be worth to Joe's Pizza in a given year. You're like, all right, there's no way this is going to be worth more than 50 grand to Joe's Pizza. No matter what I do, I cannot move the needle more than 50 grand. So let me come up with a price for 5 grand. Let me come up with a 12 grand, and let me come up with a 25 grand price. Now, given those 3 budgets, what could I do for Joe that would move this needle for him? Whatever this thing is, boxing out his competitor or competing with Domino's or whatever the thing is. And then I think, all right, with $5,000, what could I do to help him? And that's option 1 on the proposal. Option 2, what could I do for 12,000 to move this needle, to move this needle, to move this needle? It's not this list of tasks that you're going to do. The 3 different things might be completely different. One might be a training course for his webmaster or whatever.
Right.
If you think really broadly about your expertise, you can come up with some very clever ways to solve Joe's problem. And at least in my space, software developers, they love solving problems, but they have a tendency to only be interested in problems they believe they can solve with code and not just the bigger business problem. So it's a little bit of tunnel vision there.
Yeah, I think that happens in a lot of industries. I mean, there's a lot of people who, they just want to do exactly what the client has when they come up, and asking those questions that you're talking about up front, it just changes everything. And you realize, you start to get to it's an older book called Question Behind the Question. And it kind of reminds me of this a little bit, because it's like somebody asked a question, but there's actually another question behind that they were really asking when you dig a little bit deeper and you find out what's going on. And I think it's the same thing with products or services. People ask for something specific, but when you find out what they really are trying to accomplish, I had somebody one time tell me that a great question to ask in one of those first conversations with the client is, if you're, just imagine for a second that you and I are sitting down having coffee 3 years from now together, and you feel like this project's gone really, really well. What does that success look like to you? And the response that people give to those questions is so telling, because they go, well, the website was launched and it looked really good and it's generating more leads for us and we're making more money and we've doubled our revenue in the last 3 years, whatever.
Yep.
And then you can kind of root back, okay, well, he's wanting to double his revenue. What does it take to double your revenue? How many clients do you need in order to justify that? And then, you can kind of work all those things backwards, but being willing to step outside of the question that you might normally be asking is really something that's honestly taken me a long time to learn. I think I'm still working on it, but it really changes that initial conversation so drastically.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I call it the why conversation. And it feels like you're talking the client out of working with you.
Yeah.
Because I call it a sales interview, not a sales call, because you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. I want to deliver 100% customer satisfaction every time. That's my goal. And that requires that I find out what's going to satisfy them first. And then I make a judgment call on how confident I am that I can deliver that outcome. And then I get really creative about how I might help them achieve it. So it's completely opposite of what people are used to doing and what hourly billing insulates you from having to do, which isn't to say that it's easy to make the switch. Like you said, I mean, it's a practice. You need to get better at it. So if, I said earlier, this is not something that I would suggest people, do immediately out of, if you're doing hourly now, or you're just a new freelancer or something, flipping your whole business over to value pricing is not a great idea. You could easily put yourself out of business. So there are other approaches that I would have people take in the meantime to leverage their expertise and disconnect time from money so you can actually get ahead, get some actual profit. And while you're doing it, if you do decide you want to continue to do these bigger sort of implementation type projects with people, take on a really small project and try and value price it, or work with a client who you've worked with before and you're really comfortable with them. You've got you trust them, you've got good communication skills, they're reasonable when it comes to scope type things. And they come back to you and they say, hey, that was great what we did 2 years ago. We'd like to do something new with you. And you could maybe use that on a small project with them to kind of experiment with it. Because it takes people like a good 6 conversations with clients to start to really be like, oh, for the light bulb to really go on.
So what are some maybe things, let's say I'm a freelancer or a small business and I'm billing hourly right now, and I'm thinking to myself as I'm listening to this, That sounds really interesting. Like, what's a good like first step for somebody instead of trying to blow up their whole pricing model?
Right.
What are some things they could do over the next couple of days to start rethinking about how they do pricing, so that they're going to go after some small project and either value price, a fixed price, something like that? What's
Mhm.
a good first couple of steps for them to work through?
So first thing would be to start looking for expensive problems everywhere,
Hmm.
and then just practice having this conversation with people in all walks of life. Not things that you are even planning to solve, just all of, even in your own life. Whenever you hear someone complaining about something, or if you walk into the dry cleaner and you say, "How's business?" and they go, and then just get in a business owner's mindset by asking them, not making any suggestions about like how they could fix anything, just asking them like, "Oh, why does that seem like a problem?" And just watch out for yourself making assumptions about any of their assertions. So they might say, business is really down. Like, "Oh, why is that?" Oh, and they'll say something that you don't understand back, maybe some industry term. And then most people just be like, "Oh," and keep going. But if you be inquisitive and curious in a generous way, not in like an interrogation type of way, but just having small talk, saying like, "Oh, what does that mean? I'm not aware of that." And like really get into that with them. It's basically the same kind of conversation. So that you would have when you meet with someone who's a prospect. You just need to be curious about them and not feel like you're trying to convince them of anything. You're trying to convince yourself that you can actually satisfy this customer in some way by working through and figuring out what they're trying to achieve. So that's one thing. Just try to have conversations with business owners about, whether it's somebody that runs your coffee shop, whether it's your spouse or whatever. Just be in conversations. It could be on Twitter, anywhere. Get into a forum, go to a meetup, start to have conversations with people where if they mention some kind of problem or a complaint or a desire, some sort of emotionally charged language, drill into it and without being impolite, try not to stop when you feel like you've gotten to the bottom of it. Try to keep going until you feel like you thoroughly understand it. You've reached this level of like empathy, like you can empathize with the situation. That's just practice. Now, a more specific thing that someone could do immediately would be to look at the kinds of work that you've done over the past, look for some patterns, and start to create a productized service, which in my definition is it's a high touch service that you publish at a specific price on your website, but it's almost totally fixed scope. So no matter how big or small the client that comes to you, you can execute it in, say, a few hours over a week or 10 hours across a couple of weeks, a pretty short amount of labor that even, whether it's Joe's Pizza or it's Domino's, they come to you and they buy this thing for $5,000 or $1,000 or $50,000. It's not going to take you any more work to do it for Domino's or Joe's Pizza. So if you can come up with something like that, where you're like, "Oh yeah, you know what? Every time I start a project, I have to do this style guide, or every time I start a project, I have to come up with a system architecture, or every time I start a new project, I have to run down this checklist of questions to understand and diagnose their situation." Turn that into a discrete product, or package it like a product, so that people from the outside can say, "Oh, here's this thing on the shelf," air quotes. "It has a price on it. Here are the outcomes that I can expect from it. Here's what the experience of going through it would be like." And it's just very, very clearly defined. It's not this sort of like custom one-off experience for every single client. It's the same experience, the same activities that you would engage in with every client, and put a price on it. And then, I'll stop there. You can do some things to promote it after that. But that's, to me, that's the best way, the safest way, the quickest way for someone who's used to billing by the hour to start to disconnect their time from money and get a taste of real profit.
I love those ideas. The first one, especially, that whole idea of just being curious, looking for expensive problems all around you. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it'll make you a more likable person too. If you're engaging with people, I know that I personally have a problem of talking too much sometimes, and questions, open-ended questions, especially of, "Well, tell me a little bit more about that," or "Why did that happen?" or "Why do you think that is?" Are so powerful, because it gives people the opportunity to share something that maybe they were wanting to share anyway, and you're learning along the way. is absolutely huge. And the whole productized service, we really have just started doing some of that ourselves, and it's been absolutely enormous. We realized on our marketing plans there were certain things that we always did in the first couple of months that were actually really good deliverables, even outside of somebody doing a recurring retainer with us. So now we have this like half day and a full day workshop basically where they have these certain deliverables that they get out of these things that we would need to do anyway if we were running a full marketing campaign, but they also could use independently on their own, and they really are really, really valuable for them. And if I were to bill that by the hour, it wouldn't make any sense because we charge, like right now, we charge $5,000 for the half day, $10,000 for the full day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had told me that a couple of years ago, I'd be like, that's insane. But then I realize the value of what we're actually producing. Some of the stuff that we do in the half day, we did for ourselves a while back, and we're doubling our leads just because we changed our messaging. But productizing it like that has changed so much with regards to, first of all, how much time I'm willing to put into it, because it makes a lot more sense and it's exciting. And I also see the benefit that customer is getting out of it. So if you're out there listening and you don't have a productized service like that, it's easy to feel like, well, we don't have that. We just build this or we just do that. Because I felt like that for a long time, but now we've started to do that and it's had a really big impact. So thanks for that advice, Jonathan. I think that's really, really helpful for people.
Sure, yeah.
One thing I want to dig back on is you've mentioned a couple of times something that I think a lot of people don't do, and we're bad about this sometimes too, and that was you've said offer 3 prices.
Oh,
and
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about that and why that is important and how it adds value to the situation.
Yes. So this is really important. This is a you call it a trick, whatever you want to call it. People, when you come into a situation where you're going to write a proposal for a project, and a project is something that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's time boxed, relatively. It's not supposed to be this ongoing engagement. So it is a project. It's a collaboration between you and the client. And you believe in your initial conversation that you've got some feel for a rough estimate of the value, what they're trying to achieve, their home run. What is it probably worth to them? At least at an order of magnitude. And well, like I said, I would take that number. Let's say it's 100,000, divide it by 10, and then for your first option price. And so what's that? I forgot what I said already. So 10,000.
Yep.
So option 1 would be $10,000 to move toward this desired outcome. Option 2 would be 22,000, so 2.2x, and option 3 would be 5x, so 50,000. This is called a Goldilocks pricing curve. I don't think I made that name up. I might have, but it's like what it does is there's lots of psychology and science behind the fact that people tend to go to option number 2 in a given 3 options. So since you're guesstimating at the value to them, there's a possibility of leaving a lot of money on the table or pricing yourself way too high for them to work with you. So providing 3 options using this particular pricing curve, there are others, but you could use a Goldilocks pricing curve and then think, okay, what can I do with these 3 budgets that I've created for myself? What could I do to help them with this desired outcome? And there are a whole bunch of things going on here with this particular curve. First is that the option 3, if you're in the ballpark on the prices, option 3 is going to make option 2 look really affordable. Mm-hmm. If you're not in the ballpark and you're actually way too low, they're going to immediately buy option 3. So if you use a pricing curve like that and you see that people are buy option 3, like they get back to immediately and they're like, yeah, option 3, then you know that you're off by probably an order of magnitude on your pricing. Another thing is that if people are immediately getting sticker shock, even at the lowest price point, that tells you probably that you misjudged the perceived value, the client's perceived value of the desired outcome, or that you're not communicating the benefits of each different option in the proposal. Instead, you're just talking about the deliverables. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do the other, and then at the end you're going to have this. Instead of talking about, the benefits of option 1 are that you will. I don't want to talk about guarantees quite yet, but you benefit of option 1 is that you'll know exactly what next steps to do. Your executive management team will have a playbook for making decisions like this in the future. Your CMO will know how to hire 3 more people. So, there's some business benefits to each option, because when you've got 3 options instead of 1, never do 1. Two's not great. Four's not great. Three is the magic number because it gets people thinking about how would we work with this person instead of should we work with this person. So it's kind of like instead of giving them an ultimatum, take it or leave it, it's $10,000 or it's $50,000. You're saying, well, here are some options. So it immediately gets them thinking like, okay, these all sound kind of good. The difference between option 1 and option 2 is 12,000. So what's the benefit? What do I get for my extra 12,000 here? And it's like, oh, geez, we get onboarding for all the employees, and like we're guaranteed that they'll adopt this new software. And then, okay, well, what do I get for my, option 3? What do I get for that additional whatever it is, $30,000? Oh, I see. Well, they're going to take steps to ensure that my clients like the new invoicing portal, and that they're going to adopt it, and that they're going to like it better than some of our competitors' pricing portals. So we're likely to decrease churn in our giant, with our gorilla customers. So if you talk about, so there's so much stuff going on here. You've got 3 options. No matter how you price them, you should always do exactly three options. And people are going to have a tendency to go for option 2 just because people do that. If they aren't going to options 1, or if they're going to options 1 or 3, there could be a lot of things going on there. But the idea of presenting people with options instead of an ultimatum, a take it or leave it type of thing, is super, super beneficial. And unlike productized services, having that option 3 up there allows you to leave less money on the table. Really the only downside of a productized service is that you have a tendency to leave money on the table, because if Domino's comes along and buys your call it a marketing calendar planning or something like that, if Domino's comes along and buys it for $50,000 or $10,000 or whatever, they probably would have paid 10 times more than that. Mm-hmm. So by publishing your prices on your site, you're getting the benefits of decreasing the sales process dramatically, making your sales process much more easy, but you're probably leaving money on the table. Adding options to your custom proposals for custom projects sort of reverses that. So you're going to leave less money on the table.
And 2 things too, I think are really important that kind of add on to that. One is for people that are thinking about productized pricing and publishing prices versus not publishing prices, you can have like an entry-level product or some kind of service that you publish a price for, and then something that's totally custom priced as well. So that's kind of how we do it, is like our discoveries, or we call them blueprints. Our blueprints are pretty much fixed priced based on particular deliverables and things we know we have to do for that project. They're going to be valuable for them whether they use us for the service or not. But then the actual quoting of the whole project itself is almost always totally custom depending on what we're doing. Right. But to circle back a little bit to those 3 pricing models. First, I've never heard a separation of pricing, so I appreciate that. That was really valuable for me. I think it will be for a lot of people that listen. And just to reiterate that, just as an example, he had $100,000 value. He took the top value was $50,000, and then if you do the very bottom one was basically 10 times less, and then that middle one was 2.2, which is 22,000. Really interesting way of pricing that, and it makes a whole lot of sense. Honestly, when I see it on paper and I write it down, I think I've been leaving some money on the table. So yeah. I really appreciate that input. And, it's interesting. This episode's gone a little bit different than a lot of them do, because usually I'm digging into like the person and their, life experience and their business experience, their team experience. So I've missed a little bit about that. So I may have to have you on another episode just to talk through those things.
Sure.
But I wanted to talk about hourly billing so much because I think that these things are, confusing for people to think through because they're different than what they've always been told. And it does take a little bit more brain power than just sticking a dollar amount on an hour and calling it a day. But I think you've shown us just in the time we've had together already that there is potentially a lot of money that's being left on the table. And not just that, but you might not be doing the right things for the clients. Those have been 2 big takeaways for me.
Yep.
Jonathan, I like to shift gears just a little bit here because we're running out of time, and I always like to hit on this question because it's important to me, but it means something different to everybody. So we're changing gears, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's work-life balance. I don't even really like that term because I don't think it's always a balance. I think it's seasons of life are different, but it means something different to everybody depending on where they're at and what they're doing and who's around them in life. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what does that even mean to you? What does work-life balance mean to you? How have you learned to kind of find harmony or whatever you want to call it in your own life? And maybe where are you still working on it?
Okay, so this is obviously a very personal thing for everyone, but I'll just tell you my story. I'm not recommending it. This is what works for me, though. A long time ago, I decided that I only have, one life. I have so many hours per week, and that's it. I have one calendar. I don't have a work calendar and a home calendar. I just have one calendar that has appointments in it, and those are places I said, or events that I said I was going to be at, or things I said I was going to do at a particular time. It doesn't matter to me if it's work or home. Along with that, one of my core tenets of my business when I started is that I don't work with people who I wouldn't want to hang out with. Like, if I don't want to have drinks with you, I don't want to work with you. So all of my client work has been very, very close relationships. I'm still friends with, I might not be in constant touch with them, but I'm still close with a lot of past clients. So it feels a lot less, so work feels less like work and more like, I don't want to say socializing, but there's still like close personal relationships. Not to harp on hourly billing, but having, it allows, by giving someone a price and being like, that's it, that's the price. You're not going to, there'd be no change orders. There's no overage. I've never, I stick with it. I stand behind my price. And what that does is it makes your relationships with your clients much, much stronger because you're taking on a lot of their risk. You're both incentivized in the same direction. You're both trying to hit the same home run. So it makes you much closer to your clients. You do have to be picky about who you work with. But that's actually ends up being better. So I would say a combination of working with people who I like, recognizing the fact that there is no difference between my work and my life. It's the same thing. I don't draw a distinction. I don't shut off and okay, now it's family time, and then back to okay, now it's work time. I've worked from home for 10 years. I have an office now, but I just if I need to send an email, I send an email. I just don't spend any time thinking about it at all. I just do what I need to do when I need to do it. And I do what I can to ensure that everything I need to do is super fun. So yeah, I delegate things that aren't super fun, or I just stop doing them. I recognize if I ever dread something, I just stop doing it. I offered a service for a while called road mapping, and I used to dread writing the road maps. So I just stopped doing it, changed the way it worked. So I just constantly architecting my work life so that it's fun. And it's almost hard for me to go on vacation because I enjoy my regular routine as much as I do.
That's awesome. I think that's a place where a lot of people listening to this probably want to get to, but I think your advice there is strong in that sometimes you have to make the hard decisions to do that. You have to be willing to say, I'm going to stop doing this. And there's going to be seasons of life, especially if you're early in business or a career, where you're going to have to sludge through it because you got to be able to pay the bills. That's just a reality. But if you start to figure out some of this pricing stuff, start to find complicated problems that that you have the ability to go help solve for people, all of a sudden there's some magic that can happen in that. And I love the idea of work's not a pain for me. I like doing what I get to do. And the whole one calendar thing, same for me. It's one calendar. It's not like work calendar and a social calendar and a family calendar. It's just one thing. And I block time on that by design for what I want to spend time on and where my honest priorities are versus letting the whirlwind of the day get a hold of me. Jonathan, I really appreciate you being on the show today. Last question I always like to wrap up with is you spend a lot of time with coaching and consulting and helping other people grow and learn. So how are you constantly learning? I feel like a lot of people that are leaders and have been successful in business, usually they're hungry learners, but everybody has a different way of doing that. So what does learning look like for you?
Read a lot. I'm on a couple of really good mailing lists, and I have a bunch of podcasts where I have guests on, and usually it's pretty self-serving where I'll say oh, who I'd really like to talk to? This person or that person. I'll bring them on the show and interview them. So it's a combination of mailing lists, books, some podcasts also. I think it's the usual stuff. I don't think it'd be any surprises there. It's more about picking the right things and coming at them with, because it's easy to go down a rabbit hole of oh, I'm just been on YouTube for 4 hours. Where am I?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those sorts of things. So like, are you looking for specific recommendations or?
Sure. Yeah. If you have some, that'd be awesome.
I mean, I think a great book on this topic that was my Bible for many years is called Value-Based Fees by Alan Weiss. It's a little old at this point, but I think probably 80% of it is super applicable to anybody thinking about this. It touches on all the big picture stuff. It took me a long time to understand him, but once I did, I could not stop reading Seth Godin's daily blog. It took me, it's funny because it took me a really long time to understand where he was coming from, but once I did, boom. So Seth Godin's daily email is you're guaranteed like 2 amazing emails a week for sure. They're not all stellar, but of course they can't be. And what else? Books, email list, podcast. I think for podcasts, I mostly listen to like entertainment stuff, like Mabim Bam and Lore and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the feedback there. Seth Godin is definitely one of my favorites. The guy is an absolute genius.
He's a genius.
And he can be an interesting one to get a hold of. But once you do, he is just such a smart guy. Well, I know you've got all kind of things going on. You've got books, you got podcasts. But where's the best place if people want to find out more about you, about your thoughts, and maybe kind of figuring out some of this billing stuff and how they can improve it? Where should they look online?
Yeah, the first place to go would be valuepricingbootcamp.com, which gives you like a 7 email sequence that walks through the kinds of things we've been talking about here in more depth. And I treat my mailing list like a community. I email every single day, and I field, some days 50 questions from people that reply to messages. So that's the best way to start to get where I'm coming from. And if you have questions for me, to do it there.
Awesome. So valuepricingbootcamp.com and the daily email, I'm going to check that out myself because I think it's going to be a huge benefit for me. It's been one of those things, value pricing, fixed pricing, hourly billing. We still kind of do a blend of a lot of different things depending on what we're doing. But continued conversation, discussion, and education on this topic has probably been one of the most important things for my business. So I appreciate your time today. I think it's going to be really valuable to all the leaders out there who are getting to listen to it. And I'll be checking out your valuepricingbootcamp.com. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.